At 5 in the morning, a 325-square-foot apartment on Orchard Street begins changing shape. A kitchen that served as a bedroom a few hours ago must become a place for water, fire, food, and pressing clothes. Blankets are folded before a coal bucket can cross the floor, because the same narrow path belongs to sleeping and work. In the front room, a sewing machine waits beside unfinished dresses that will soon turn the home into a factory. 2 smaller rooms sit behind it, and only the front and rear of the apartment receive direct outdoor light. The hallway is dark, the stairs are steep, and the building holds 22 apartments behind one Orchard Street entrance. Outside, 4 privies and 1 water pump serve the tenants in the rear yard. Nothing in this apartment has one purpose for very long. A table becomes a cutting surface, a kitchen becomes a pressing station, and a family room becomes somebody else's workplace. By evening, each transformation will have to run in reverse so the household can sleep. This film follows one reconstructed working day inside a Lower East Side tenement in 1897. The apartment is based chiefly on 97 Orchard Street and the home garment shop operated there by Harris and Jenny Levine. The Levines were real people, but they left no diary describing every hour of an ordinary weekday. The times used here organize documented routines into a single day and should not be mistaken for a recovered schedule. Factory reports, census records, surviving rooms, museum research, photographs, maps, and reform investigations supply the physical evidence. When those sources disagree or fall silent, the narration will say so instead of filling the room with invented certainty. The result is neither a tour of misery nor a story in which hardship automatically becomes heroism. It is a close look at how work, family, commerce, belief, and basic maintenance competed for the same few hundred square feet. For the people living here, the apartment was cramped and dangerous, but it was also rented, arranged, defended, and made into a home. The day starts with the first problem. Before anyone can earn money, someone has to rebuild the room around being awake. Number 97 Orchard Street was built in 1863 on a lot only 25 feet wide and a little under 89 feet deep. The 5-story brick building occupied most of that lot, leaving a narrow rear yard for the services that could not fit indoors. 4 apartments were arranged on most floors, and each apartment contained 3 rooms totaling about 325 square feet. The plan was ordinary enough to be profitable. Many rent-paying households could be placed on a small Manhattan parcel. A front room faced Orchard Street, a kitchen faced the yard, and a dark middle bedroom depended on borrowed light. Interior windows and the air shaft visible today came later, after new housing rules forced alterations in the early 20th century. In 1897, a person moving from front room to kitchen passed through spaces with weak ventilation and little privacy. Sounds traveled through thin doors, floorboards, the stairwell, open windows, and the yard behind the building. Cooking smoke, coal dust, garment fibers, voices, crying children, and sewing machines occupied the same enclosed air. The front door opened directly into a street dense with stores, carts, workshops, pedestrians, horses, and other tenements. The building was privately owned, and its rooms were valuable because thousands of newcomers needed housing near work and community. Between 1863 and 1935, the Tenement Museum estimates that about 7,000 people from more than 20 nations lived at this address. That figure covers decades of turnover, not 7,000 people packed inside at one moment. The building's residents included German saloon keepers, Irish laborers, Jewish garment workers, Italian families, shopkeepers, widows, children, and boarders. Their stories differed, so this one apartment cannot stand for every tenement or every immigrant household in New York. Even within the same building, income, family size, religion, occupation, health, and length of residence changed daily life. What the walls did impose was a common geometry: narrow rooms, shared circulation, limited services, and almost no unused space. The rear yard held the water pump close to the privies, an arrangement that placed convenience and contamination beside each other. The basement stored coal and other supplies, which meant every scuttle of fuel traveled up a staircase by hand. A modern floor plan looks small on paper, but the real measure of the apartment is how many tasks had to happen inside it. The household does not wake all at once, because bodies, bedding, and furniture block one another in the dark. One adult rises first and feels for clothing that was placed within reach before the candle went out. A match, a candle stub, or a small lamp gives enough light to find the stove without filling the apartment with daylight. Mechanical clocks existed, but surviving evidence does not tell us whether this particular household owned a reliable alarm. Street noise, a neighbor's movement, factory hours, habit, or an inexpensive clock could each help start the morning. The first person awake must step carefully around children and folded garments that cannot be allowed onto a damp or dirty floor. Beds in working tenements were often improvised from couches, pallets, folding furniture, or shared mattresses, depending on the household. The later Rogoshevsky apartment at 97 Orchard used its kitchen for girls at night and a front-room couch for boys. That later example does not prove the Levines arranged everybody the same way, but it shows how rooms changed at bedtime. Morning requires those arrangements to disappear before cooking, sewing, and customer work begin. Blankets are shaken carefully, folded, and moved away from sparks, grease, food, and the presser's hot iron. A basin allows a quick wash of face and hands, provided someone has already brought water from the yard. There is no private bathroom, no shower, and no flush toilet inside the apartment at this date. Night soil, chamber vessels, and the trip to the rear yard privy belong to the same morning routine as dressing. Modesty depends on timing, turned backs, doors, blankets, and the willingness of family members to ignore one another. Clothing is brushed and reused because garments cost money, take time to clean, and cannot be casually replaced. A child may still be asleep while an adult converts the few feet around that child into a working kitchen. The apartment's lack of empty space does not stop the routine. It makes the order of each movement more important. Before breakfast, the household has already completed a small piece of logistics involving light, privacy, bedding, water, and heat. None of it appears in a factory inspection report, yet the paid work cannot start until this unpaid work clears the floor. The trip for water begins at the apartment door and runs down 3 flights into the rear yard. At 97 Orchard, one pump served the saloon and all of the apartments for more than 40 years. 4 wooden privies stood in the same confined yard, close enough to the pump to worry later health investigators. A tenant needing water for washing, coffee, cooking, cleaning, and the garment iron might make this journey repeatedly. The amount that reaches the kitchen is limited by the vessel, the stairs, the carrier's strength, and everyone using the passage. A full pail pulls downward, strikes the leg, and spills when another resident turns the corner too quickly. In winter, the yard and pump can be cold. In summer, the privies and standing waste become harder to ignore. A queue at the pump turns household work into a negotiation among neighbors who share the same inadequate service. People exchange news there, argue over turns, watch children, and learn which household is sick or short of fuel. Community grows around the pump partly because the building leaves residents no private alternative. The same water must be budgeted across drinking, food preparation, personal washing, dishes, floors, and textile work. Clean water is therefore a quantity to manage, not an invisible utility arriving under pressure from a tap. Wastewater has to leave the apartment as deliberately as fresh water entered it. A heavy slop pail on a dark stair creates a second risk after the first climb has already tired the carrier. Children may be sent for smaller amounts, turning the building's plumbing problem into part of childhood labor. The 1901 new tenement house law would require running water and toilets in new apartments, but that reform lies ahead. At 97 Orchard, gas lines, running water, and interior toilets arrived through later alterations, not with the original building. The pump in 1897 belongs to a city already famous for its Croton water system, yet distribution still stops in the yard. Municipal infrastructure can reach the block without reaching the room where people need it. By the time the first pot reaches the stove, somebody has carried the missing section of pipe on an arm. Water alone does not make breakfast. The coal stove must be persuaded into giving heat. Fuel stored in the basement travels upward in a scuttle, leaving dust on hands, clothing, walls, and floorboards. Newspaper, kindling, draft, and carefully placed coal start a fire that can smoke before it burns cleanly. The stove warms the kitchen, heats water, cooks food, and later heats the presser's iron. That efficiency keeps several jobs around one source of heat, but it also crowds people and combustible material around the same hazard. A weak fire delays food and work. An overfed fire consumes fuel the household must purchase again. The Tenement Museum imagines an early Levine meal assembled from familiar items such as bread, eggs, and potatoes. Historical diet studies also describe tea or coffee, bread, herring, beans, rice, soup, and small amounts of meat or fish. Those foods were not eaten in identical combinations by every Jewish family, and religious practice shaped what entered the kitchen. For an observant household, kosher rules affected ingredients, utensils, preparation, shops, and the weekly rhythm of cooking. Breakfast on a workday favors food that is affordable, available nearby, and possible on a crowded stove. Coffee or tea stretches warmth through the meal, while bread supplies calories without occupying the stove for long. Potatoes can be cut in candlelight, but the knife, poor illumination, and crowded table make speed less simple than it sounds. The kitchen table may also hold thread, cloth, a laundry basin, children's things, and tools needed later in the day. Clearing it for breakfast means relocating objects rather than finding an unused surface. Food must be protected from coal dust, garment dust, insects, mice, and the ordinary handling of a busy room. An icebox is possible in 1890s New York, but it costs money, occupies space, and requires paid ice deliveries. Poor households often relied more heavily on frequent shopping, preserved foods, cool corners, and quick use of perishables. Breakfast ends because the room is needed for work, not because everyone has enjoyed an unhurried morning. Bowls and cups move aside just as the first employees begin climbing the stairs toward the front room shop. By 6:30, the street outside is doing several kinds of business at once. Pushcart vendors claim space near storefronts, delivery wagons stop at awkward angles, and pedestrians thread through the gaps. Horses provide much of the street's moving power and leave manure, urine, flies, noise, and traffic behind them. Wheels strike stone, iron rims scrape, harness fittings shake, and vendors project their voices above the mechanical clatter. Orchard Street is a route to work, a market, a social space, and the front edge of hundreds of homes. Many recent immigrants can buy from people who speak familiar languages and understand religious or regional preferences. The Lower East Side supports synagogues, mutual aid societies, schools, workshops, reading rooms, theaters, bakeries, and small stores. A newcomer may lack English and capital, while still possessing neighbors who know where a room, job, doctor, or loan can be found. This local network does not cancel exploitation, but it can make the first months in a new city survivable. Workers leave some tenements for factories and lofts, while others remain inside apartments that double as contract shops. Children move towards school, errands, street trades, sibling care, or paid tasks, sometimes combining more than one. Women carry food, laundry, fuel, babies, piecework bundles, or combinations that make the sidewalk another workplace. The street offers access to goods in tiny quantities, useful for households with little cash and almost no storage. A customer can buy a few potatoes, a piece of fish, a candle, or coal without financing a week's supply. Buying small amounts may cost more over time, but poverty often makes the cheaper bulk purchase impossible. The neighborhood's density creates customers for small sellers, and competition fierce enough to keep margins narrow. It also places refuse, food, animals, wastewater, and crowds in the same limited public space. For a child at a window, the street is entertainment. For a vendor below, it is rent, inventory, weather, and police attention. The city calls this congestion a problem, while residents also use it as an improvised system of distribution and support. Upstairs, the apartment door opens again, and Orchard Street enters the home in the form of 3 garment workers. The front room now has to function as a garment factory without ceasing to be part of the family home. Harris Levine ran a dressmaking shop here and hired 3 workers, according to the Tenement Museum and an 1892 inspection record. The surviving report lists dresses, 1 male worker, 2 female workers, and a 60-hour week for the shop. A later museum reconstruction shows a sewing machine operator, a baster, a finisher, and pressing work divided across the rooms. The exact assignment could change, but the task system depended on several hands completing different parts of each garment. One person guided cloth through the machine, while another prepared seams, and another finished edges, fastenings, or decorative details. The presser used heat and weight to give completed pieces the shape expected by the contractor or customer. Payment by piece or completed task made time visible in bundles rather than in a guaranteed hourly wage. A slow seam, broken needle, sick child, delayed delivery, or rejected garment could reduce the day's return. The shopkeeper balanced rent, material, equipment, deadlines, worker pay, family needs, and the prices offered by larger contractors. Owning the small shop provided a measure of control, yet competition could push that control toward longer hours and narrower pay. The workers speak Yiddish, which allows recent arrivals to earn money without first mastering English. Language creates ease inside the room, but it can also confine employment to networks where workers have less bargaining power. The sewing machine is the largest mechanical advantage in the apartment and still requires constant control by foot, hand, eye, and ear. Its treadle moves beneath the table, while fabric, belts, wheels, and the needle must remain aligned above it. The sound settles into a rhythm that children, neighbors, workers, and the family hear for hours. Daylight from the front window is valuable enough that the machine belongs near it, even when that arrangement crowds the room. Cut pieces are kept off dirty surfaces, finished work is separated, and needles must be found before a child finds them. The apartment has become productive in the language of business and more dangerous in the language of domestic life. By 7:15, the day's paid labor is underway, only a few feet from where the family ate breakfast. A finished dress looks like one object, but the shop experiences it as a sequence of separate operations. Pattern pieces must be understood, cloth aligned, seams marked, layers controlled, and mistakes caught before they spread through a bundle. Basting uses temporary stitches to hold fabric in position for the sewing machine operator. Machine stitching joins the main seams quickly, provided the needle, thread tension, foot pressure, and operator all cooperate. Finishing removes basting threads, secures edges, adds trim, closes openings, and corrects what the machine could not complete neatly. Pressing sets seams and shape with an iron heated at the same stove used for the household's food and hot water. The garment therefore travels through the front room, kitchen, workers' hands, and the family's shared air before leaving the apartment. Dust and contagious disease worried inspectors because commercial clothing was being made inside crowded residences. Reformers sometimes described every home shop as pure victimization, but families also used these shops to enter trades and build businesses. The Levine shop eventually helped the family save enough to move to Brooklyn and place the business outside the home. That later success should not make the 10-hour shifts in 325 square feet comfortable after the fact. Opportunity and exploitation can occupy the same room, particularly when the alternative is unemployment in an unfamiliar city. The workers are paid to produce clothing, not to manage interruptions created by the household around them. The family is not paid for surrendering privacy, rearranging meals, tending the stove, cleaning the dust, or keeping children clear of tools. A contractor collecting dresses sees the completed pieces and may never see the cramped chain of work behind them. Piece rates reward speed, so the shop can respond by shortening rest, extending the evening, or bringing another family member into the process. When prices fall, the same income requires more garments, and more garments require more hours. The Smithsonian describes fierce competition among contractors, keeping wages down and workdays long in tenement shops across American cities. Here, economic pressure becomes audible as the machine continues through conversation, meals, crying, street noise, and fatigue. Each dress leaving the room carries the labor of several people whose names may never appear on its label. Children in a home workshop do not cross a clean boundary between family life and industrial life. They wake beside the workplace, eat near it, play around it, and learn which movements will be punished as dangerous interruptions. Pauline and Hyman Levine were young children during the late 1890s, when the museum places 2 children in the apartment. Later records show the Levine children attended school, but many neighborhood children combined education with chores or paid work. An older child might carry bundles, remove basting threads, watch a younger sibling, fetch water, buy food, or clean the room. Some tasks look small until they are counted across 6 workdays and placed beside school attendance. New York's compulsory education rules developed through this period, but law on paper did not remove the income needs of poor families. Crowded schools, language differences, work demands, illness, and irregular attendance complicated the promise of public education. A classroom could provide literacy and English, while also pressing children toward an American identity chosen by school authorities. For immigrant parents, schooling offered possibility and sometimes a distance from the language, religion, or habits maintained at home. The route to school passed through streets where children worked as newsboys, peddlers, messengers, scavengers, and helpers. Street knowledge taught prices, insults, routes, police behavior, useful languages, and which adults could be trusted. It also exposed children to carts, horses, disease, violence, exploitation, and traffic without a protected play area. Riis and other reformers campaigned for playgrounds partly because tenement children used alleys, roofs, fire escapes, and streets as recreation space. Reform photographs often show children as symbols for an audience, which can flatten individual lives into evidence of a social problem. Inside the apartment, a child's experience is less tidy. Boredom, affection, fear, play, work, food, scolding, and curiosity happen together. A child can turn fabric scraps into a toy, while an adult sees the same scraps as waste that must be swept away. The sewing machine rhythm may be irritating, familiar, or even reassuring because it means the household has orders to complete. Silence could mean Sabbath rest, a broken machine, illness, or the more frightening absence of paid work. At 9 in the morning, childhood continues beside the needle because there is nowhere else inside the apartment for it to go. By late morning, the pushcart market has thickened into a moving wall of goods, voices, animals, wheels, and customers. Carts sell produce, fish, bread, clothing, household tools, books, toys, candles, and second-hand objects in quantities neighborhood buyers can afford. The exact mix changes by street, season, hour, and the connections each vendor has to wholesalers. A vendor with little capital rents or owns a cart, buys stock, finds a place, watches the weather, and risks unsold goods. Police and city officials may treat the cart as obstruction, while nearby families treat it as their closest shop. The Tenement Museum notes that vendors adjusted to garment workers' long hours and later used lanterns so trade could continue after dark. A shopper from 97 Orchard can compare prices without traveling far, but the crowd makes every errand slow and physically close. Haggling is part of the transaction because pennies matter to both the buyer planning dinner and the seller protecting a thin margin. Food is touched, inspected, smelled, weighed, wrapped, and carried through streets with dust, manure, wastewater, and flies. The market is unsanitary by modern standards and often fresher than goods that have sat longer in a poorly ventilated shop. Later investigators found that pushcart wares could be as good as those sold by neighborhood stores, despite official complaints about congestion. A household without refrigeration benefits from buying perishables near the hour when they will be cooked. The cost is another trip downstairs, another trip upstairs, and more time taken from cooking, cleaning, childcare, or paid work. Credit may come from a shopkeeper who knows the family, while an anonymous cart seller may need cash immediately. Language and trust influence where a shopper buys as much as the sign above a storefront. Religious rules direct observant customers toward known butchers, bakers, and vendors whose goods meet communal standards. The Lower East Side is described as chaotic because many small systems operate in public at the same time. That chaos also allows a newcomer to find familiar food, hear familiar speech, and locate work before the city feels legible. The basket returning to the apartment contains dinner, but it also records prices, relationships, risk, and the limits of storage. Upstairs, those purchases must wait beside commercial dresses, while the garment shop continues toward noon. At noon, the kitchen must feed the household without bringing the shop to a full stop. Jenny Levine may also have prepared food for the 3 workers, according to the museum's reconstruction of the family business. That detail is presented as a reasonable possibility, not a documented menu or a record of her exact daily role. Food preparation shares the stove with the presser, so heat, timing, and surface space have to be negotiated. A pot moved for an iron and an iron moved for a pot can delay both domestic work and garment production. Soup makes sense in a household economy because water, vegetables, starch, bones, or a small amount of meat can serve several people. Bread and herring require little fuel, which matters when coal has a price and the stove already supports industrial work. Tea can be poured quickly, but water still had to be pumped, carried, stored, and boiled before it looked effortless. Workers paid by the piece may shorten the meal because an idle machine produces no completed garment. The shopkeeper may want speed for the same reason, even while his family needs the room for food. Children eat within reach of needles, hot metal, fabric dust, and adults focused on a deadline. Crumbs attract vermin, grease threatens cloth, and spilled tea can damage work worth more than the meal. The table is wiped, dishes are stacked, and production reclaims the surface almost immediately. There is no paid lunchroom, no separate kitchen staff, and no cleaning shift arriving after the workers leave. Every service that supports the workshop is folded into the household and usually into women's unpaid labor. The arrangement lowers the visible cost of production because rent, heat, cleaning, and care are already being paid somewhere else. It can also keep a mother near young children, an advantage created by turning her home into an employer's supply chain. The benefit is real, and so is the pressure of never leaving the workplace because the workplace cannot leave the family. At 12:30, the dishes remain in the kitchen while the sewing machine regains its full pace. The apartment smells of coal, cooked food, hot iron, bodies, and cloth, with no ventilation system to separate them. The hardest danger to film is the air, because a room can look still while carrying smoke, dust, moisture, odor, and infection. Tenement rooms with few exterior windows trapped the products of cooking, heating, work, breathing, and illness. Opening a window admitted fresh air along with street noise, soot, weather, insects, and smells from the yard. Closing it protected heat and privacy while allowing the interior atmosphere to worsen. The middle bedroom at 97 Orchard lacked direct outdoor light before later alterations cut new openings through walls. Reformers linked darkness and poor ventilation to tuberculosis, a disease that spread readily in crowded housing and workplaces. They also confronted typhus, cholera, childhood infections, and high infant mortality, although causes were not always understood correctly at the time. The pump beside the privies created an obvious sanitation concern even before germ theory became part of public policy. Shared toilets could overflow, freeze, break, or become fouled faster than owners or city inspectors responded. Tenants still had to use them, often at night, in bad weather, while sick, pregnant, elderly, or carrying a child. Garbage accumulated in yards, cellars, streets, and air shafts where collection and enforcement failed. Rats and insects moved through walls and food storage without respecting the boundary between one family's cleanliness and another's neglect. Telling residents to be cleaner could not create more water, drainage, toilets, windows, space, money, or municipal service. That is why housing reform gradually shifted attention from private morality toward buildings, landlords, inspection, and city infrastructure. The shift was incomplete, and reform language still carried prejudice about immigrants, poverty, religion, and supposedly respectable behavior. A family could scrub its floor and still live above a dirty cellar, beside a blocked privy, and across from a coughing neighbor. Illness also threatened income, because a worker absent from piecework did not complete the pieces needed for pay. Medical care cost time and money, while a sick person often remained in the same rooms used for food and production. The apartment's crowded economy turned health into a shared condition long before anyone used that modern phrase. At 1:30, the window may be open or shut, but neither choice solves the structure around it. Paid garment work is easy to hear because the machine repeats itself. Domestic work disappears into smaller movements around it. Someone fetches water, tends the fire, washes dishes, sweeps cloth dust, removes ash, shops, watches children, and plans the next meal. Laundry adds soaking, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, drying, starching, ironing, folding, and another series of trips to the pump. The kitchen image preserved by the Tenement Museum shows how laundry, cooking, ironing, work, and sleep competed for the same room. A large family wash cannot happen comfortably, while a presser and cook both need the stove. Some laundry may be spread across smaller sessions, sent out when money permits, or handled on a day when shop work changes. The evidence does not give us a Levine wash schedule, so this hour shows the pressure rather than claiming a precise routine. Even without a full wash, collars need attention, children's clothing needs repair, and work clothes collect dust and sweat. Mending protects garments that the family cannot afford to discard, and draws on many of the same skills used for paid sewing. The difference is that repairing the household's clothing brings no piece rate. Ash from the stove must be cooled, contained, and carried away without dirtying food or finished dresses. Floors collect coal grit, street dirt, threads, lint, food, and whatever entered on the shoes of 10 people. Sweeping raises some of that material back into the air before it leaves the room. A baby or young child converts every hot iron, needle, bucket, stair, and open window into a supervision problem. Older children often absorb part of that supervision, which allows adult work to continue while narrowing their own free time. Domestic labor is interrupted because it exists to handle interruptions, hunger, spills, illness, crying, missing tools, and unexpected visitors. Its success is measured by the absence of crisis, making competent work look like nothing happened. The front room's dresses will eventually leave with a price attached, while the clean cup and safe child remain economically invisible. That invisibility helps explain why home industry could appear cheap to businesses farther up the contracting chain. At 3 o'clock, the unpaid shift has been running as long as the paid one and will continue after it stops. By 4, the best daylight has begun to move away from the front room window. Eyes that have followed dark thread, pale cloth, needles, seams, and tiny errors for hours now work with growing strain. The sewing machine operator's back and legs repeat one posture while the baster and finisher bend over handwork. The presser lifts hot iron, replaces it, checks the cloth, and returns to a stove that has heated the kitchen since morning. In summer, the combined heat can make the apartment punishing. In winter, the stove may still fail to warm distant corners. 10-hour shifts do not require every minute to look frantic, because endurance itself becomes the difficult part. Conversation can make repetition bearable, carry news, teach a newcomer, settle an argument, or slow the count of completed pieces. A shared language gives workers privacy from outsiders and lets instruction happen without translation. It also means an inspector who does not speak that language may misunderstand the people being inspected. The 1892 report reduces the shop to address, product, worker categories, and hours, useful facts that leave most experience unrecorded. No column describes the temperature, the sound, a worker's aching hand, or the child trying to cross the floor. Historical records often preserve what an institution needed to count, rather than what residents most wanted remembered. A bundle of completed dresses is inspected for loose threads, uneven seams, scorch marks, missing trim, and anything a contractor might reject. Rework consumes time without necessarily increasing the amount paid. Finished pieces are folded or hung away from cooking and children until somebody carries them into the next stage of trade. The garment may enter a shop under a fashionable name that gives no hint of Orchard Street. A buyer sees style and price, while the room that produced it remains absent from the transaction. This distance allows consumers to dislike sweatshops in theory, while purchasing the low prices that sustain them. The same contradiction survives far beyond 1897, even after production moves out of New York apartments. For now, the last bundle is not the end of work. It is the reason the workers continue as daylight fades. The Lower East Side is more than housing and labor, even when work takes most of the day. Immigrants build congregations, burial societies, mutual aid groups, political clubs, unions, libraries, schools, theaters, newspapers, and businesses. These institutions translate the city, lend money, arrange funerals, help the sick, find jobs, settle disputes, and preserve community obligations. Some are religious, some secular, and many mix practical assistance with arguments about what a new American life should become. For Eastern European Jewish residents, Yiddish connects newspapers, theater, humor, politics, commerce, and conversation across the neighborhood. English remains necessary outside many local networks and becomes a dividing line between generations with different schooling. The Levines closed their shop on Saturday to observe the Jewish Sabbath and worked Sunday instead. That schedule placed religious time above one day of production while separating the household from the city's dominant Christian week. Preparing for Sabbath required food, cleaning, candles, clothing, and work completed before Friday evening, much of it organized inside the home. A day of rest, therefore, rested on additional preparation that did not distribute itself equally across the family. Synagogues ranged from formal congregations to small groups meeting in rented rooms near the people they served. A newcomer could recognize prayers and customs while confronting new accents, new politics, and different levels of observance. Mutual aid societies offered support before modern public welfare systems, though benefits depended on membership, dues, rules, and communal acceptance. Neighbors might share childcare, information, a meal, a loan, or the address of an employer who needed another pair of hands. They could also compete for the same room, order, customer, or pushcart location. Density produces solidarity and friction because the same people remain physically and economically close. The apartment door is not a complete barrier. Voices, smells, gossip, favors, and disputes move through it. Privacy is scarce, but isolation can be difficult too when neighbors notice illness, unemployment, violence, or an unpaid debt. For the family upstairs, belonging is built through repeated obligations rather than through a simple arrival story. At 5 o'clock, the neighborhood begins receiving workers while the home shop still has hours left to run. Dusk changes the price of every remaining task because light now requires fuel, equipment, attention, and money. New York already has electric power stations and bright commercial districts, but that modern city does not extend evenly into tenement rooms. The Tenement Museum says 97 Orchard originally lacked gas, running water, indoor toilets, and mechanical heat. Gas lines reached the building through later alterations, and the exact date within the late 1890s is not certain enough to stage casually. For this reconstruction, candles and portable lamps supply the apartment without claiming that every neighboring building used the same source. A flame gives local light and consumes oxygen while adding heat, smoke, soot, and fire risk. Its position matters because workers need illumination on a moving needle and children need to pass without striking it. The dark stairwell remains difficult, even when an apartment door spills a little light onto the landing. Outside, vendors extend trading with lanterns so garment workers can buy food after a long shift. Evening customers fill the street at the same time deliveries, carts, horses, and people returning home compete for space. A shopper carries the day's remaining cash and calculates dinner against coal, rent, thread, candles, medicine, and tomorrow's needs. Small purchases reduce the immediate total while guaranteeing another errand soon. Ready-cooked food can save fuel and time, but the household gives up some control over cost, ingredients, and religious preparation. A bakery, fish seller, butcher, grocer, or pushcart can become part of the household's kitchen without entering the apartment. The market's late hours are useful because employers and contractors have already claimed most of the daylight. Leisure and consumption overlap as young people walk, talk, look at goods, and find moments of social life around necessary errands. The neighborhood remains loud enough that quiet inside may be impossible with the window open. Closing the window protects the lamp and reduces noise while trapping more heat and garment dust. Every solution changes another condition in a room with few ways to absorb the trade-off. At 6 o'clock, darkness has arrived, but the workday has not accepted the message. Dinner does not begin by clearing the whole apartment, because the shop cannot surrender every surface at once. A pot returns to the stove while the presser finishes the pieces that still need heat. The family may eat in stages if workers, children, and adults cannot all leave their tasks together. Bread, soup, potatoes, beans, fish, or a modest portion of meat can stretch across several people and tomorrow's meal. The exact dishes belong to household income, season, religious practice, prices, and personal taste rather than to one universal immigrant menu. Food history becomes misleading when poverty is turned into a picturesque table that hides repetition, shortage, or worry. It also becomes misleading when every meal is described as deprivation and the skill of the cook disappears. A cook working with one stove, limited water, uncertain storage, and little surface area makes constant technical decisions. She manages heat, sequence, contamination, leftovers, children's needs, religious rules, fuel, and the shop's demand for space. Those decisions rarely enter a census because the form records occupation more easily than unpaid expertise. The 1900 census listed Jenny Levine without an occupation, while Harris appeared as a lady's tailor. That blank does not mean Jenny performed no work, it means the census categorized her contribution differently. After eating, plates and scraps must be removed before bedding can return to rooms that are still partly industrial. Children may begin schoolwork near a lamp while adults continue sewing, finishing, talking, or calculating the day's production. A worker living elsewhere watches the hour because another crowded room and another set of household duties may be waiting. The shop closes only after pieces are counted, tools secured, materials protected, and tomorrow's work made ready. Payment may happen by completed task, finished garment, or arrangement with the shopkeeper, leaving income tied to accepted output. When the hired workers finally descend the stairs, the apartment does not become restful immediately. It becomes a recently vacated workplace, containing a family's dirty dishes, displaced belongings, tired children, and tomorrow's deadline. At 7:30, dinner has fed the people while creating the next round of cleaning and transformation. The hired workers are gone, but their chairs, thread, scraps, heat, and day's production remain in the rooms. A needle left on the floor can injure a sleeping child, so cleanup has a safety purpose beyond neatness. Finished garments are counted and placed where damp, food, ash, vermin, and small hands are least likely to reach them. The sewing machine stays because it is too heavy and useful to disappear with the workday. Its presence keeps the front room partly commercial even after the last employee leaves. Accounts may be checked under lamplight, pieces completed, money expected, wages owed, supplies needed, and rent approaching. A shop that appears busy can still fail if the price offered for its garments does not cover all of those obligations. The family's own labor absorbs losses that a larger factory would have to record as rent, maintenance, cleaning, heat, or supervision. That is one reason home production can look cheap from farther up the chain. Bedding returns to the kitchen, middle room, couch, floor, or whatever arrangement the household has made for that stage of family life. Adults undress with limited privacy, while children settle within earshot of neighbors doing the same thing through thin walls. A final trip to the privy may require stairs, the dark yard, a lamp or candle, and confidence that the flame will hold. Chamber vessels reduce that journey during the night, but create cleaning work in the morning. Windows are adjusted against weather, noise, smoke, odor, and the need for air, with no setting that solves every problem. The stove is banked or allowed to fall, depending on season, fuel, safety, and the need for morning heat. A crying child, coughing neighbor, late cart, argument, saloon, or returning worker can interrupt sleep before it begins. Crowding does not mean families never experience tenderness, humor, prayer, storytelling, or relief. It means those moments occur without much physical distance from labor, illness, conflict, and other people's lives. By 9 o'clock, the apartment looks more like a home again, although the machine and garment bundles remain visible in the dark. Sleep is another temporary arrangement that morning will dismantle. Much of the visual memory attached to New York tenements comes from photographs made or collected by Jacob Riis. Riis was a Danish immigrant, police reporter, lecturer, writer, housing reformer, and an early user of flash photography as persuasion. Magnesium flash powder allowed a camera to record rooms that ordinary photographic methods could not capture in low light. The flash was bright, smoky, loud, and dangerous enough that Riis reportedly set rooms or equipment alight more than once. People being photographed did not always know when the sudden explosion of light would come. Some images were candid, some arranged, and at least one man was paid to pose as the type Riis wanted to show. Riis's selected places, people, captions, and sequences to convince middle-class audiences that reform was necessary. His work exposed conditions many comfortable New Yorkers preferred not to see and helped turn housing into a public political issue. It also used stereotypes, moral categories, and ethnic judgments that reveal the reformers' assumptions as much as the residents' lives. A photograph can prove that a room, object, or arrangement existed without explaining every relationship inside the frame. The person holding the camera controls when the room is entered, where the light points, and what the viewer is told afterward. That makes Riis indispensable evidence and an incomplete guide. The surviving rooms at 97 Orchard add measurements, surfaces, wear, alterations, and household objects that his dramatic images cannot supply alone. Census pages provide names, ages, origins, occupations, literacy answers, and family relationships at one official moment. Factory reports preserve worker counts and hours while saying almost nothing about personality, conflict, affection, or ambition. Museum researchers combine those fragments and mark possibilities where the record cannot support certainty. This film follows the same rule by labeling realistic generated scenes as historical reconstructions rather than archive footage. No generated face should be mistaken for Harris, Jenny, their children, their employees, or an unidentified person in a Riis photograph. The strongest historical image is sometimes a floor plan, a pump, a wage column, or a doorway whose limits are honestly known. At 11, the imagined camera leaves the apartment and the evidence stays behind in separate pieces. Around midnight, Orchard Street finally quiets without becoming silent, and the apartment holds tomorrow's work beside sleeping bodies. The family's day has depended on one pump, one stove, a few rooms, several workers, neighborhood commerce, and layers of unpaid maintenance. No single invention will transform all of those conditions at once. The 1901 New Tenement House Law requires stronger standards for light, air, water, toilets, fire safety, yards, and building inspection. New construction changes first, while older buildings, such as 97 Orchard, are altered through enforcement, expense, negotiation, and delay. The landlord eventually installs gas lines, running water, interior toilets, new windows, and an air shaft in response to changing laws. Those improvements matter, although narrow shafts can carry noise, odor, disease, and fire as easily as the fresh air reformers imagined. Garment work gradually moves from many tenement rooms into larger shops and loft factories, where exploitation takes different forms. Workers organize unions, strike, demand shorter hours, and force questions about wages and safety into public view. The Levine family remains at 97 Orchard for 13 years and eventually saves enough to move to Brooklyn in 1905. Harris opens a business outside the home, and the apartment no longer has to contain that family's factory. Other residents continue arriving, working, raising children, losing jobs, building businesses, becoming ill, helping neighbors, and moving when they can. The building closes to residential tenants in 1935 and survives because commercial spaces remain active while the upper floors sit sealed. Today, the Tenement Museum preserves the address and reconstructs apartments through records, archaeology, oral history, objects, and building fabric. The preserved rooms should not be read as proof that every tenant lived the same day. They show how much ordinary life can be recovered when historians take rent books, pipes, wallpaper, census entries, memories, and worn floors seriously. A tenement was a business model, a health problem, an arrival point, a workplace, a community, and somebody's private address. At 97 Orchard, those meanings occupied the same 25-foot lot and often the same room. Tomorrow morning, the bedding will fold, the water will climb the stairs, and the front room will become a shop again. That repeated transformation is what one working day inside a New York tenement makes visible.